Mike Hilgers, Nebraska Attorney General, thank you for joining here this morning. For those in person and online, the way we normally do this is I'll do a few minutes about what we're doing today, and then we'll take questions at the end. We'll talk about anything you want to ask questions about, although we'll prioritize questions about our action here today. Before I start, I do want to actually congratulate two people, or sets of people. Number one is Aaron Sandiford on his new appointment to the World Herald. That was exciting. I did not know that he was Paul Sandiford's son. That was good reporting on y'all's behalf. So congratulations to him. He's a great reporter, a great part of the press corps here in Nebraska. Excited to see him in that new role. I also want to congratulate the new class of the State Patrol. Class 7-3 is going to be graduating here at 10 o'clock. For those of you either here or watching online, if you've never seen the graduation ceremony for the State Patrol, it's actually one of the coolest things that you can be a part of. And so if you happen to be around by the Capitol and can be there, especially at least for the bagpipes when they come in at 10 o'clock, it's actually pretty incredible. So I want to congratulate them. So I'm going to tell you what we did today, why we did it, why it matters to Nebraskans, and then maybe address a couple of the questions that we've received just generally about what we're doing. So this morning we are filing a lawsuit against the city of Lincoln, asking a court to declare their recently passed ordinance on the minimum wage unconstitutional. Why are we doing that? Well, we're doing it because it's unconstitutional, but here's what has happened. As you know, the people of the state of Nebraska passed a petition to modify the state statute as to minimum wage, which they are entitled to do. The legislature has been given power and authority by the people of the state of Nebraska to modify, if they have a certain set of votes, that it goes over a certain threshold, modify a statute passed by the people, which they in fact did. The city of Lincoln then has passed an ordinance, and I understand Omaha is considering passing a similar one, that directly conflicts with that state statute. And because it conflicts with that state statute, and that state statute deals with a matter of statewide concern, the city of Lincoln's action is unconstitutional. Now, what I want to do is just convey two of the ways, the primary ways that the Lincoln ordinance is unconstitutional. Or conflicts with the state statute. I'm going to show this to you. Because when people talk about this, sometimes they lean on kind of esoteric legal concepts like conflict preemption or field preemption. And I just want to show just effectively what has happened. What you're seeing here is a provision of the state statute that was passed by the Nebraska legislature and signed by the governor. And this is a provision that says an employer may, you can see here, may have a lower minimum wage paid to certain classes of employees, specifically teenage employees. What the city of Lincoln has said, and they haven't actually crossed out the may, but what they have said is that is actually not what you're allowed to do. In the city of Lincoln, they have a different minimum wage. And so if you are an employer in the city of Lincoln, you can either comply with the state statute, which allows you to actually have a lower minimum wage, or you can comply with the Lincoln City Ordinance, which says that you cannot have that lower minimum wage. But what you cannot do is you cannot do both. So this is an effective rewrite of the state statute as it applies to people in the city of Lincoln. Now, because it's in conflict and because it deals with a matter of statewide concern, which is minimum wage, base level wages across the state of Nebraska, we believe this is clearly unconstitutional, and that's ground number one. Now let me show you ground number two. And this is the second part of the statute. So what the state legislature said is they said, hey, look, we're going to set this minimum wage, and then we're going to allow it to increase over time. They didn't have to do it. They didn't have to have any increase over time. They could have picked any metric that they wanted to pick. They could have picked CPI. They could have picked some other base inflationary metric. They could have picked a percentage that just applied every single year, but picked a different percentage than what they picked. But what they did is they actually picked a very specific percentage, which you can see here on the board here. What the city of Lincoln has said is, no, actually, we're going to have this minimum wage threshold, and it's going to increase by CPI. Well, we know right now CPI is a lot higher than what is here, 1 3/4%. It's a lot higher than that. And so what the city of Lincoln has said is it's going to increase at a higher rate than the state level. Again, this is an effective rewrite of the statute, because what the state has said is you shall pay people at this rate, and what the city of Lincoln is saying, no, you shall pay them at this higher rate. You cannot do both. You cannot do both. So that's in conflict. Again, because they're direct conflict with state statute as passed by the Nebraska legislature, and because it deals with a statewide concern, The city of Lincoln does not have the authority to do what it is doing. These are unconstitutional ordinances, and we filed suit, and we'll be asking for a preliminary injunction to enjoin the ordinance before it goes into effect. Now, why does it matter to Nebraskans? And then what are some of the common questions that I've received? And then I'll open it up for any questions you might have. Well, it matters to Nebraskans because, first, our constitutional structure matters. The idea of having a system with rules that are followed is important to all of us, so we can have certainty both for businesses and employees and citizens. And here, what the state has said is the state legislature generally predominates over city ordinances. Even home rule cities like the city of Omaha have limits. They are not small states unto themselves. They ultimately are inferior political subdivisions that are inferior to the state of Nebraska, at least on issues of statewide concern. So it's important to enforce our constitutional structure. If the city of Lincoln can do this and the city of Omaha can do it, then what this will amount to is a possibility for significant chaos where what we really need is certainty. If the city of Lincoln can decide that it doesn't want to follow state statute within its municipal boundaries, then what it could also do, think about in the space of income taxes. Those are set by the state legislature. If the city can set base level minimum wages that are different from the state legislature, then there's no reason to think that they could not also set a different income tax level than what the state legislature sets. So you could envision the city of Omaha, the city of Lincoln deciding that what they want to do is raise the income tax or modify the income tax as it relates to people within their borders. So this is an important part that's foundational to our system of government. It's important to have clarity as to who gets to make the decisions, under what set of circumstances, and what can Lincoln do or Omaha do versus the state. That's why it's important to Nebraskans. What are some of the questions that I've received? Well, one is, hey, look, didn't what the legislature do is just create a floor. So you could argue they created a floor and the city of Lincoln is just going over the floor. State legislature could have done that. The state of Nebraska could have done that, but they did not do that, actually. What they could have done if they wanted to do that, and by the way, I've served 6 years in the legislature, I was the speaker, what they could have said here is, it shall be no less than 1 3/4%. They could have said, it's this level, but cities of the primary class, which are Lincoln, or cities of the metropolitan class, which is Omaha, can do whatever it is that they want. The Nebraska legislature knows how to draft statutes. They know how to draft floors. They didn't do it that way. So this is not a floor. Another question I get is, well, wait a second. This minimum wage change is really important, and it's really important to give people higher wages. I want to be clear, I'm not weighing in on the policy. That's not my role anymore. I'm not in the legislature. Whether a minimum wage should be higher or lower, or raise its CPI or some set percentage or not raise at all, those are not questions for me. Those are questions for the Nebraska legislature. They're not questions for the city of Lincoln. All I'm making sure is that the entity that gets to decide under our Constitution is the one that is deciding. The last thing that I get, or I've heard, is, well, wait a second, didn't the people speak on this issue? There's no doubt the people did speak on this issue when they passed the initial petition. But the people have also spoken in the form of our Constitution. And what the people have said is that even when a petition passes, the people have given the state legislature the right to modify that petition. That is a right and an exercise, a grant of authority that the legislature has exercised in this case. So the people have given the legislature the right to do this. The legislature acted. What the people have not done is give the city of Lincoln, or the city of Omaha for that matter, the right to modify or partially repeal statutes that are passed by the legislature that deal with statewide issues. So that is what we've done today, why we've done it, why it's important. And now with that, I'm happy to take any questions you might have. Yeah, Juan.
If the city of Omaha passes their ordinance, is this lawsuit going to expand to them as well?
So the question is if Omaha passes their ordinance, we'll expand to them. So a couple things. First, I believe they're not going to vote on theirs until later in July.
Yes.
So the first thing is we're seeking a preliminary injunction, Juan. So we're hopeful that we'll have an order from the court before then. So then we'll see. If we have an order enjoining the city of Lincoln's ordinance, I wouldn't expect Omaha to do something similar, at least. Their ordinance is also similar to, but I think it's different in some ways from the Lincoln one, and we haven't gone, because they're not voting on it until July, we're sort of focusing on this one first, then we'll get to that one down the road. But my hope is that we'll be successful at the district court level with the court, and that Omaha will not decide to do what Lincoln did. Yeah, John.
Some might say that you're not the appropriate party to bring this lawsuit, that you don't have direct damages. Could you talk about standing here?
Yeah, so that's a good, so the question is, I might not be the appropriate party. It's actually it's a great question, John, because there's two sets of people who could file a lawsuit here. There's no doubt that the Nebraska Attorney General has the ability, standing, substantive authority to sue to enforce state law. That is like black letter constitutional law. So the idea that the state attorney general doesn't have authority, I think is not an argument that will go anywhere, because it's clear that we can. Look no further, by the way. Recently, someone tried to bring that argument in a different, more complex set of circumstances when we sued Hans Borg Weiss in Madison County over his funding of using foreign dollars under our allegations to fund ballot petitions, by the way, one of which was the minimum wage petition. They argued the same thing. Wait a second, the Attorney General doesn't have standing here to enforce that law. And the court's like, no, of course the Attorney General does. The second question, though, or the second part of it is, private parties do have the right to file suit. And I will tell you that I have had conversations with private parties who have considered filing suit. And the thing that is alarming to me is that I've heard from those parties that they do not want to sue because they are afraid of retribution from the city of Lincoln. And that is concerning to me as a private citizen, that there could be companies or entities or people in the city who are concerned of exercising what are ultimately their constitutional rights, because it will impact their ability to run their business, and are afraid of suing because they will be retaliated against by the city of Lincoln. Now, they have to make whatever decisions they're going to make, but ultimately for us, we absolutely have standing. And this is a quintessential function of the State Attorney General's office, which is to ensure that the state constitution, the laws passed by the state, are enforced. Very similar to our enforcement in the OPPD case when we sued OPPD, based on the affordability and reliability components of our public power laws.
I guess, in the legislature, we hear a lot of discussion about local control, things like that, different legislation. I'm just wondering, for folks who, say that they're in favor of local control, they want cities to be able to make decisions, I think that this was kind of an example of that, but would you push back on that notion at all, that this is infringing on that?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So Josh's question about local control, and is this infringing on local control? So the idea of local control, I think a lot of people are in favor of it, but I think it's important to talk about local control in the concept of what are we trying, what can local communities actually do? So an overriding principle over local control is the consent of the governed through our Constitution. So in our Constitution is our base level document at the state level. That is the thing where we decide the parameters over First Amendment rights, freedom of religion, gun rights. In this case, it isn't about, for me, it's not about, is this a thing that should be decided locally as a policy matter? What I'm saying is the state constitution has made plain that issues of statewide concern are decided at the state legislative level. So if you think that it's better for the city of Lincoln to make these kinds of decisions on the basis of local control, or frankly any other argument, which by the way I don't agree with, that is an argument for our constitutional structure, which is a whole separate different issue. I believe that would be a step too far for local control. There are certain things that do require statewide attention, but nevertheless, that's a constitutional issue that's frankly already been decided for us, at least as of today. Does that answer your question? Okay, John.
What would you say to onlookers who are maybe disillusioned by this lawsuit, who participated in the election in which the minimum wage was won by a sizable majority, with specific language, and then the legislature over the course of several years modifies that, and from their perspective waters it down, and now the city of Lincoln takes a step, says we're going to restore that, what you guys voted on, especially in Lincoln where it's about 60% support, and then you now say, no, that's against the law. What is your message to those voters, and how should they pursue their agendas, their interests, if not through the ballot?
I really am grateful for the question, John, because I think it's important for all of us, and I'm a citizen who votes on these petitions, to understand that we all have to operate by the rules given to us by the Constitution. That is ultimately the founding document. And the people have the right to modify statutes, and the people have given the legislature the right to change those statutes. If we don't want that power to be in place, we have to change the Constitution. So the legislature was exercising authority given to it by the people. The city of Lincoln does not have that authority. And I think we need to live in a world in which we have agreed upon rules, which we have, and that we follow those rules, which is what we're trying to make sure that happens. If someone is frustrated by this outcome, there's multiple different ways that they can go try to approach it. One, they can change the rules of the game. And by the way, changing the rule of the game is a reasonable thing to go to try to do, as long as you're doing it based on the rules that we have. Change the rules by changing the Constitution. Don't change the rules by thumbing your nose at the Constitution and asking the city of Lincoln to sort of achieve what you otherwise didn't get to achieve because the legislature modified it. And that matters because if we're going outside of the rules, I would ask those people what would happen if the shoe is on the other foot and if there's a petition that passed that they don't like and the legislature made what they viewed to be reasonable modifications to that statute, and then the city of Grand Island or Scotts Bluff or Norfolk just said, I'm not going to follow those rules. But rules are meant to protect both sides on any particular given issue, and all we are trying to do is not be outcome-based, we're trying to enforce the rules. If they want to change it, they could change the Constitution. They could look at changing the Constitution for minimum wage issues. There are routes that they can do it, but I think one of the great problems in our political culture today is when people don't get the outcome that they want, then they are trying to achieve it by other means, and many times those other means are not themselves constitutional, and that is what happened here. So that's what I would say. Do we have questions online at all? No? Okay.
We have 17 people watching us.
Nothing. All right. Got the Killer Jays here in person, and then
That's right.
I guess, I'm thinking, you kind of point out like the language, right? Like the bill was written in a specific way. I guess I'm just wondering, like, do you foresee, if Lincoln were to say, like, okay, well, we still want to take the action of, increasing this minimum wage. Let's tweak the language, just to kind of, or do you see like the statute that the state set as being pretty, like, inimitable in that way, that a city could sort of work around it?
yeah, at least on these, it's a great question. So Josh is saying, well, if the city still wants to find, is there a constitutional lane that they want to take to be able to try to accomplish some of these goals? They haven't asked me for my legal advice. We try to provide it in our Attorney General opinion. They didn't want to follow that, which is their prerogative, of course. I think this language as it's drafted, Josh, is difficult to do the things that they're trying to do. So, for instance, the legislature has explicitly said that there can be a youth minimum wage. If the city of Lincoln doesn't like that and doesn't want that to be the case, I don't see how they can accomplish that without effectively rewriting the statute. Because the state has said you may do X, and what the city is now saying is you may not do X, and I don't see, that seems to me fairly binary. Similarly here, I mean, the legislature in this case really didn't give that kind of flexibility that maybe some people would like, but that was their prerogative, I'm not there anymore, I didn't vote on it, but they got 33 senators, 2/3, which is a hard bar, try to get 2/3 in the United States Senate, or the House for that matter, and they didn't vote for it. So I think if the city of Lincoln wants to have this kind of flexibility, I think what they ought to do is go to the legislature and lobby the legislature, just like other citizens would do now. And they got a great team. They do a really good job, and maybe they can convince the legislature to give primary class cities the authority to act. But I really do struggle to see where the zone of opportunity is for the city based on the current language.
And I guess I have a process question too. Do you expect the court, to make a ruling on this fairly quickly, or is this the kind of thing where, it might take a while and then the cities have a chance to, Lincoln to, maybe rescind something, and then Omaha obviously still has to vote. But I guess if you have time, what's the usual?
Yeah, it's a great question, Josh. So, big picture, one of the reasons we filed the lawsuit today is this ordinance doesn't take into effect till next month. So we wanted to make sure we were not squeezing a district court. Now, having said that, courts usually don't act, even within a month, but we're going to ask for a preliminary injunction. Typically, under a PI timeline and schedule, you would expect some kind of court ruling within the time frame that we're looking for. So we're going to ask for a ruling before the ordinance takes into effect, and our hope is that we'll have an injunction before then, and so then the issues sort of presented by your questions don't take hold. But what I do think, because we're asking for a PI, we will have some clarity in advance of the ordinance coming into place, which is an important question for both workers as well as businesses, because this ordinance has criminal liabilities attached to it. I'm not sure that a lot of people, I think that has not been really fully discussed in the sort of in the broader discussion on this. And so you've got companies who are facing criminal liability if they don't comply with Lincoln. So it's really important for us to get certainty and clarity before the ordinance takes effect. All right, do we have anything online? Nothing else here?
I'll ask one thing. I guess if I'm somebody who, signed the ballot initiative, right? And then you're saying like, the Constitution, it empowers the legislature to sort of act on
Mhm.
what people pass. But then, one person's like, well, I didn't sign that part of the, Constitution, directly, right? Like, this is sort of a direct democracy thing. I guess, if somebody feels like frustrated or, feels like it's sort of stacked against the individual in that case, do you see it that way?
Well, there's kind of two questions there. One question is this idea that they didn't sign on to the Constitution. And then the second idea is if they feel like it's stacked against them. On the first point, I would say we do not want to live in a world in which the Constitution is being re-ratified for every 2 years or every 4 years. There's a lot of wisdom in the things that are in the Constitution. I think our process has worked really, really good. Really well, excuse me. There are things that protect all of us that have been voted on and been enshrined and have a lot of precedent wrapped around them that protect all of our individual liberties, our right to free speech, our right to petition our government, things that maybe today, if we were going to revote, would be maybe not have as much popular support. And so I think while I understand and am sympathetic to this idea, well, I didn't sign the contract, I think this idea of having a constitution that binds us, that our ancestors signed, and we have the opportunity in real time to modify, which we do, I think is a system that works really, really well, so long as we follow the lines. On the other hand, to your other question, which is the stacked against them, I would actually say, look, the system's working. I mean, the system was working as it was designed. This got passed. It got on the ballot. It got passed by the people. Now, 2/3, by the way, is a really high bar. The fact that they got 33 senators to vote to modify it shouldn't take away from the fact that there were multiple things passed by the people last cycle. There's probably going to be more things passed this cycle, and I think that part of our democracy does work very well, but it's all balanced within a greater structure. And I would argue we don't want to live in a world in which the legislature cannot, or the bar is so high that the legislature functionally cannot modify statutes that are passed by the people. So I would say, speaking from someone who has had their own political battles where I've lost policy fights, it is frustrating, it is difficult. And I've lost policy fights where I've come back and won, and I've lost policy fights where I've come back and lost again. And that's frustrating, but I think our process is meant to enable people to kind of keep taking swings. And I think the recent history is that people have been able to pass things on the ballot, and they've been able to get things done. So I think the system works pretty well. It's a good question, though. Nothing else? Okay. Well, thank you all for being here. Thank you.